Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for 11/4/2018. We're up to 1959 Ben-Hur. I'm going to get to baseball stuff, end of season for the Cubs, and then the World Series commentary sometime this week. I promise you. I will eventually get Cubs, back to Cubs, and then I'll do like an postseason. Off-season stuff. Well, I guess I should also say this. I'm very happy that Cole Hamels was retained, and they cleared some space for him, and by trading Drew Smyly to the Rangers. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, so Ben-Hur is a movie from 1959. I'm also going to have some commentary on the 1925 version of Ben-Hur. It's a very, very good movie. Rewatching it today, it struck me just how much I really liked this film. I know I've given a review of it before, way back in the way back when I started Cubs and Culture, and I think I might have said something at that point that it's a little bit uneven in the last hour drags, and which I guess is still true. But I ultimately really, really like this movie. The main thing I want to talk about now, before I get into the storyline, is this movie is the one of the four huge winners. Titanic, Lord of the Rings, and Gone with the Wind is the other one. It won 11 Oscars. Now, the thing is, it probably would have won 12, except Ben-Hur famously had a very bitter argument about the screenwriting credit, where it was formerly only Carl Turnberg who got credit. But the thing is, William Wyler had both Gore Vidal and, let me look, Fry something. I don't want to say Stephen Fry. Work on the piece substantially. In any case, so the thing is, MGM just because Ben-Hur is from this book, Ben-Hur: A Tale of Christ by Journal Lee Wallace. That over the years they just sort of accumulated scripts, and Carl Turnberg's script was the one they used for. Wyler hated it. He actually kept writing in the margins, terrible rewrite, as he was prepping the movie and actually flying to Italy to start shooting. So Gore Vidal was a writer who was brought in, and he kind of famously added sort of a contentious bit of the story, which I'll actually show the scene. And then Christopher Fry was also brought in to rewrite the dialogue. And then apparently Maxwell, Anderson, and Burnham also scripts were used. In any case, so William Wyler campaigned for Stephen Fry to get, he didn't want Turnberg removed. He wanted Fry added, and Fry, being a gentleman, said, well, Vidal should also be added. And so excuse me, and Wyler was fine. So the idea was to get screenplay credit to go Christopher Fry and Gore Vidal, and a story credit to Carl Turnberg. But then they went into arbitration, and the WGA just sort of arbitrarily said, no, the final film is Carl Turnberg. It was entirely Carl Turnberg's script. So William Wyler actually spent most of the Oscar season campaigning against Ben-Hur winning screenplay because of this. And Carl Turnberg, if I remember, he actually was nominated for one other award. Back in the 40s. So I just think that's sort of funny. So I'm convinced that without that political credit dispute, this movie would have actually won 12 Oscars, because it won everything. It won director, screenplay, it won everything but screenplay, and it was nominated for screenplay because the screenplay is very, very good. So let me bring this up. The movie has dated actually fairly well. I think it helps because it's an ancient, it's a sword and sandal film, which doesn't really, there's sort of a timelessness to these if they're done well. So anyway, well, it's not technically a sword and sandal. It's an American biblical epic, where the sword and sandal films are actually from Italy. But whatever, it's a sword and sandal as far as the genre is concerned. So let me bring up some clips and everything. See you guys in a sec. Okay, so if you've never seen it, this is the trailer from the 1925 version. Ben-Hur is the story of Judah Ben-Hur, who is, through a twist of fate, falsely accused of trying to kill a Roman governor of Judea by his childhood friend Messala, who was a Roman tribune, i.e. commander of the guard, everything like that. And he goes off and he's a gallery slave and wins his freedom being a charioteer on the Great Circus, comes back to Judea to get his revenge on Messala by racing him in a chariot race. And then, at the same time, there is a subplot, I guess, of the basically the big beats in the Christ narrative. So the movie begins with either version and the Nativity, and then you have the Sermon on the Mount. You have a couple of the miracles. In the 1925 version, you have the "Let he who without sin cast the first stone," etc. And then the movie ends on the crucifixion. And then, in terms of sort of the Ben-Hur story, his mother and sister end up getting leprosy, and then Christ cures them at the end, more overtly in the 1925 version, more subtly in the 1959 version. Overall, I really do like this story. It's just, excuse me, sort of effortlessly cinematic because it has that big sea battle and, of course, the chariot race. The 1925 version, which you're seeing now, is a fairly good movie. It's like a good first draft. It's much more overtly interested in sort of the political aspect. So the movie puts far more, the 1925 version puts far more stress on Messala being Roman and Ben-Hur being Jewish. And it comes across much more in the terms of the 1925 version, much more of a story of oppression as opposed to betrayal. And then the religious themes are much, much more overt in the 1925 version, in that you see Christ literally, directly, by waving his hand over them, the leprosy, everything like that. Ben-Hur in both versions of the story ends up more or less converting to Christianity. In the 1925 version, it's less, it's much more overt, and he actually hears God telling him to drop the sword, blah, 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 and love thy enemy, and everything like that. And so I much prefer the 59 version, so I give like the 25 version an 8 out of 10, and the 59 a 10 out of 10. Now, the one thing I do think the 1925 version does really well is it constantly sort of references the biblical text, as you just saw with Luke, and then a paragraph from Luke, to reorient it. And so I think it sort of handles the religious themes a little bit more forcefully, which is good. And so it's much more overtly Christian, whereas the 59 version is something like a religious humanism. In any case, one thing I really, really like about the 25 version is the use of limited use of color. So you have night scenes in black and white in sort of a twilight coloring. And then you have most of the time, you have religious scenes like this. This is now 2-strip Technicolor, and this is the nativity scene. So they're going to cut to Mary and Mary and the baby, Jesus. And for the most part, the color is reserved for the Christ scenes, the scenes directly dealing with the Christ narrative, which I think is a really good way of making them otherworldly and making them divine. Unfortunately, there's like one scene in Rome which has nothing to do with Christ that's also filmed in color, which is sort of a thematical mistake. But in any case, I really like that use of color. The 1925 version, I like to think of it as like a good first draft. It's about an hour shorter, so if longer movies aren't your thing, the 25 version is probably a better choice for you because it is shorter. So there's that. So yeah, okay. And I don't know. In some part, I do like that the religious themes are more subtly done in the 25 version. More overt. Like they're more done. Like they're stronger in the 1925 version. On the other hand, the 1959 version, which you're looking at now, this is the trailer, is a far richer, far more personal film, and it will have its sort of just different emphasis. So they reverse the story where it's much more about Masala and Judah Ben-Hur being childhood friends and then betrayal, not oppression. So it's less is at least initially less is made of the fact that Judah is Jewish and Masala is Roman, where it's much more about betrayal because of politics as opposed to oppression because of politics. I also have to say this while this is playing. This is one of those films I really wish I could see on the big screen because of it being shot in 65 millimeter. It's a very lush film. It's a very beautiful looking film. The DVD I have, even watching it on like my big screen TV, I feel like the film loses a little bit of its spectacle. It was shot in 65 millimeter, and Wyler, who's the director, does a really good job of filling the frame without getting it cluttered, which is really sometimes hard to do, especially since 65 was a new format. So we ended up using deep focus a lot. In any case, so the first scene I want to talk to you about is coming up right here. This is the most This is the most controversial is not the right word. This is the scene in which there's the most conflicting reports in terms of production history. So I interpret this scene as sort of, okay, so this is the scene in which Gore Vidal said that he got approval for Wyler to write it as a jilted lover scene, or as some sort of former erotic relationship between those two. Now, I don't quite go that far because Heston's not really playing that. Stephen Boyd is. So and there's a line, I don't remember if I recorded it, but there's a line about, isn't there the saddest thing, unrequited love, from Masala, which I think is actually in reference to Ben-Hur. In any case, I think there's not an eroticism between them. On both sides, there's absolutely a spiritual or agape love between them, and so that which really makes it feel much more like betrayal as opposed to oppression, which makes the story less political and more personal, which I really like, and I think it's a far richer story because of that. In any case, so the argument here, or the sort of the scene controversy, is Gore Vidal claims he intended for this to be a homoerotic subtext. Stephen Boyd, who plays Masala on the left, seems to be agreed with that. Wyler denies it, and Heston absolutely denies it. But the thing is, there's certain choices in this scene, like that they're having spears, and they're going to throw them when they're touching, which, boys want to play with their spears, which I think it's really hard to avoid that. And again, I feel it much more on Masala's part, and I actually think the movie works better if you don't assume on Judah's part that it's eroticism, that it's agape on his part, whereas for Masala it's like he's checking him out there, but where in any case it's much more eroticism and agape and eroticism for Masala, and I think that really makes the story much richer. And I really do like that there's this sort of gay subtext in a biblical epic from the 1950s, and it's really amazing to me because of that. In any case, this re-emphasis on the personal over the political, I think, sort of helps the narrative be less stagey and stilted and stuffy, as you sometimes get in biblical epics. So stuff like this comes across much more powerful and much more human. Because this is probably the most famous scene in the movie. This is Christ is on the right. This is after he's been convicted of trying to kill the governor, and he has been denied water, and Christ gives him water, which is just a very kind act. There's sort of a theological problem of like, why is God in allowing this to happen anyway? Because it's unjust. Maybe free him from his bondage as opposed to just giving him water. Any case, one of the things I really, really like about this, and I know I've said this in the past, in my previous review, that I really like that you don't see his face and you don't hear his voice. And you can't hear, but there's absolutely lovely music here. But the thing that I really like is you mostly see the divinity in people's reactions, because this soldier is going to basically do a double take here, as if he was cowed by the power of God, because Christ doesn't say anything. And I really like that, because that isn't like a voice from on high, or there isn't a biblical quote there. It allows you sort of the freedom to just have it as a sort of a religious humanism, that you're interpreting it as not Jesus the Christ, but Jesus of Nazareth, i.e. the historical figure, not necessarily the Son of God. And he was just this charismatic and powerful preacher, as opposed to literally the Son of God, if you're not happen to be a Christian. And I feel, and that theme allows you to be a lot more accessible. And I think Weiler being Jewish helped with this, because it sort of allowed him, where in the 25 version, it's clearly an argument for Christianity, where this seems much more like a humanistic film that happens to be dealing with Christ. And I think that, for my own sort of religious convictions, I think that really hits it in a good place for me in terms of what I would like from a religious movie. Okay, so this scene, this is a little bit later on in Rome, and this is... that's his adopted Roman father and the ship captain that he saves, blah, blah, blah. And then this is how he wins his freedom, is he's been driving that guy's chariot. The reason why I'm showing it is this is a really good example of the deep focused, and the way in which the film balances the spectacle with the intimacy. Because the background, which it's a very well done matte painting, is in focus as well as the foreground. So it feels like it's this really personal story in this grand sort of setting. And I really, really like how Weiler fills the frame throughout the movie by doing stuff like this, by having deep focus, where the foreground and background are both in focus, so that you get sort of the intimacy and the spectacle at the same time. It's a really interesting way of making the film feel alive and making it human and personal, but also grand and spectacular. And it's a nice balance he strikes in this film, where the spectacle of the story never overwhelms the themes of the story or the heart of the story. I know a lot of people find the 59 version a little bit too slow, and maybe some scenes play long, but I like how it's very rich and filled out. Okay, so this sequence right here is some of the most interesting sort of like technical direction in the entire film. So that's his mother and sister, and they have leprosy. Now, in 1959, the makeup wasn't very good. And so Weiler, very, very sort of modern. So like, you can't, leprosy is such a specific look that your mind actually does better by just sort of implying it. So his use of shadow right here in terms of concealing their face, and then also having sort of their staging of their cloth and blocking it and everything like that, allows your mind to fill in the gaps. And it's really sort of modern and contemporary in terms of the imagery, because he's letting your mind do the work here, where he's not showing off his, to be frank, probably crappy makeup effects. And I really like the way in which this film sort of has an illustrative quality to it, and it's shots like this where I feel like feels like it's the most drawn to me. Okay, so this is Hugh Griffiths playing the Sheik in hilariously ineffective and offensive brownface. because he's not Arab, he's actually British, and that's like shoe polish or something. It doesn't really work. It's probably the thing that most dates the film. Is the 1950s, as like a sort of a, in this case, this is the guy who won the supporting acting Oscar. That they're sort of okay having this white, black, brown face character, and it's really not okay that he didn't cast a natural Arab. But apart from that, Hugh Griffith, I think, is does a really good job. I'm kind of annoyed that he won the Oscar as opposed to Stephen Boyd, because Stephen Boyd is a much better, much more hefty performance. Griffith and the Sheikah are a larger-than-life, like, merchant character, though I think he serves a very important function within the story, because he's sort of the moneymaker, the guy who's the sort of gambling and everything. And where he sort of has a not a religious view, and he constantly sort of undermines the Christian message. So when you have like the Balthazar, gives a, put down the sword, and he was like, yeah, but that only works if everyone's good. And I think it's important to have non-Christian views in the film, and the Roman guy also sort of functions like that. Now, the other reason why I'm showing this scene is there's a specific line coming up where I think it's actually a very clever piece of writing, because they're setting odds to the chariot race, and they're going to conclude 4-1. And the guy's going to be the difference between a Roman and a Jew, and someone says, or an Arab, and it cuts to the Sheik, and I swear this is why he won the Oscar, because he's like, yeah, bravely spoken. And that's one, like, the shade of that line is amazing. Okay, so I'm going to show a little bit of the chariot scene. It's, of course, the most famous part of the movie. It's part of the movie where it's the most sort of action, and it's actually probably one of the best scenes in the 1950s. This is my favorite part of the race, though. It's not actually the race itself. It's sort of the build-up, because a lot of it is it's setting up the circus, and it's setting up all the various racers. But the thing I really like is, this is very specific, but on the ground, if you look closely, there's the ground is pristine basically until the charioteers all walk around, so it really feels like the quiet before the storm, and it's a really good way of building up the tension for this scene. Now, as a point of fact, Wilder did not direct the chariot scene. It was several stunt coordinators and other directors, and it's kind of stands out apart from that because it doesn't feel like Wilder. It feels like a slightly different hand, which is fine. It's a very exciting sequence, and the other thing that's sort of amazing about it, this is a good shot to see what I mean by the pristine and then the hoof prints, is there is no music during the actual race. It's just the clippity clap of the horses, and so it's really this interesting, it's this really exciting scene, and it's a really bold choice to not have music. Can't think of any other like major set action piece where there's no score, it's just sound effects, and that would never happen today. And so in the end, this is sort of probably the most famous stuff in the movie. If you say Ben-Hur, everyone thinks of the chariot race, and of course there's something just very symbolically correct by having Masala in black and Ben-Hur in white. This is also a very famous image, because that image of the angle above from that statue's basically like sort of a statue point of view. It's repeated, and it actually gets faster and faster as the race goes along. Now, one thing that can happen in scenes like this is, because it's a big action, balls to the wall set piece, you can actually end up losing the human story. And one of the things that's nice about this scene, and one of the reasons why it's so effective, is you never actually lose track of Masala and Ben-Hur, and a lot of it has to do with the black and white horses. Now, the other thing is, Ben-Hur just won, and this is it's all like a crushed, basically. And one of the things I think this film does very, very well, because at the end it concludes that like Masala wasn't the problem. Rome as a system is the problem. And this shot of him just broken and everything like that, and Ben-Hur looking back, it's very, very human, and it's very, very touching, and it very much feels like, again, like a spiritual love, like their relationship turned sour, but it's even worse now. That he has gotten his revenge, that it's not satisfying to him. Because ultimately the movie is sort of aiming at love thy enemy, and this is the final scene I'm going to show. This is the only place, even though it's more overt in the 1925 version, this is the only place I think in Ben-Hur you have to interpret it as supernatural or fully Christian, because they're about to be cured of leprosy here. And this is another sequence where I really like the sort of direction. Again, some of it's to hide the makeup, but a lot of it is also to hide how the curing is supposed to take place. That shot of Christ on the cross, for whatever reason, that's one of the shots I most associate with this. It's such a striking image. So they're cured now, and of course, like the rain and everything, it sort of gives the sense of washing dirt and grime away. That's the other sort of shot that strikes with me. And then I think a lesser director than Wyler would have shown Christ's face during the crucifixion, but I like that the movie is uncompromised in that way, and you never see Christ's face. He's almost always shot from the back, and when he's not, it's from a distance, or it's from a distance, and his hair's over his face, everything like that. And then the last little bit of shot I really, really like, it's coming up here, and I think it's a good because of course right now they're sort of functionally or symbolically the first Christians. Again, in the 25 version it's much more clear and clear cut, but this is the shot I was about to say. I really, really like this because it's silent, there's no words, but you kind of get sort of the mixing of the blood with the water, which of course recalls like Noah's tale and everything like that, but it's also the blood of Christ is washing away the sins of the world, which is sort of the Christian meaning, but it's also in this like humanity and sort of like the humanistic reading of this film. It's sort of this, Ben-Hur's revenge wasn't satisfying, and so by putting down the sword you sort of wash yourself of violence and everything like that. And I really like that this film, like, it's a Christian movie that I feel like non-Christians can get behind, which is really hard to do, and I really, really like it. It's probably one of my favorite films of all time. So anyway, that's going to be it for Cubs and Culture. See you guys tomorrow.